All right, everybody, welcome back to the Learning Out Loud podcast. I'm your host, Dustin William. I have my co-host with me, Whitestone.
It is undeniable that a vast proportion of the actual doctrines and rules which make up the system of equity are necessarily inferences from or direct applications of some or more of these fundamental maxims.
The power is neutral. It's sitting in the quintessence until you invoke it. Behind using these things are good and holy and Christ-like.
I shall now attempt to show how the most important of these principia have been crystallized into the pithy form of maxims and have influenced and developed that grand system of truth known as equity jurisprudence.
All right, welcome everybody back to the Learning Out Loud podcast. I am your host, Dustin William, the owner and producer of True Life Productions at truelifeproduction.com, where you can find all of our content, like our flagship show of All Aboard, where I talk about the orphan trains and the history of New York, how it's connected to Skull and Bones, the Jesuits, the whole nine, man. It's a very deep, interesting story. Go check that out, and after you're done with that, you can check out Article 3 Articulations. Over there, I have the most comprehensive breakdown of the slaughterhouse cases there is on the internet, including a 3-hour video breaking down the entire case. I basically go page by page, and you will not be confused about what it says at the end. And then from there, you can check out the Thought Crime Dojo, where you can watch my research unfold as it happens. Adding a bunch of great stuff to it lately. It's really growing. I'm excited about it. It's basically becoming my own Wikipedia with real information in it. So it's going to be a cool thing for people to search in the future. But that is it with the business. I've got my co-host here with me to continue our journey through Murray F. Tully's speech to the bar in 1903. So hi, what's up, Whitestone? How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well. I'm actually really looking forward to getting into this maxim. Even though it's not the first maxim that Tully covers in his speech, I think this one really covers like the broad depth of equity's intent, which is that equity regards that as done, which should have been done, or which ought to have been done from the get-go. I think that really is the crux of what equity does. So I'm really happy to get into this one.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's I didn't realize exactly how foundational it was to the entire scope of equity jurisprudence until I started really digging into this. And one of our favorite resources, John Norton Pomeroy, he puts this as the number one maxim of equity. Okay, so with no further ado, then I guess we can jump right back into Murray F. Tully's speech to the bar in 1903. We are going to read pages 19 through 24 today. I'm going to start the reading off at page 19. Equity regards that is done which should be done. And I'll just say before I get started here, Murray F. Tully puts a lot of weight into Pomeroy. He even puts it in parentheses after here. This is basically where he drew this this information from, is how Pomeroy feels about this maxim. So let's get started. It says, this maxim is given by Story, Bispham, and Beach as follows. Quote, equity looks upon that is done which ought to be done, end quote. Well, Francis, the oldest of all writers upon equity maxim, states it in these words, quote, equity regards not the circumstance, but the substance of the act, end quote. All of these authors, except Pomeroy, discuss it in rather a limited sense in connection with the doctrine of conversion in executory contracts, while Pomeroy brings to consideration of the maxim that great learning and philosophical treatment of the subject, which characterizes his remarkable treatise upon equitable jurisprudence. He points out that the principle of the maxim lies at the very foundation of the Department of Equity Jurisprudence, which deals with equitable estates, property and interest, analogs to property, and holds that it should be, quote, applied to all cases of equities to every instance where an equitable ought with respect to the subject matter rests upon one person towards another, to every kind of case where an affirmative equitable duty to do some positive act devolves upon one party and a corresponding equitable right is held by another. So he put that in a lot of fancy language there, but for instance, where I just want to kind of break down that last little quote. With respect to the subject matter, rest upon one person towards another, to every kind of case with affirmative equitable duty to some positive act delves upon one party and corresponding equitable right is held by another party. So basically, he's the stating there that it goes along with the first equitable maxim is agere in personam, and it's acting upon the persons inside the contract to do what ought to be done in the contract, and it's not regarded as in law. We're basically in law to get a resolution on anything. They're just giving you damages. They're just giving you money for things. And in this, that is not the case. It actually acts upon the person to do what ought to have been done. So, is that how you understand it, Whitestone?
Yeah, just in my own particular circumstances here, reading this really does hit. But, equity and the equity courts really are about enforcing obligations of the defendant. And I think you can read that in a couple different spots. So, when there's an agreement between two different people, or when one person has an absolute right over a thing, or, to do a thing or within a contract, it naturally devolves upon the other person to make sure that it happens. And you're really out of this maxim, you get equity imputes an intention to fulfill an obligation.
Yeah. It springs so many maxims out of this. What I was realizing, it is really one of the most basic foundational maxims when you get into equity
Yeah.
jurisprudence, especially with the stuff we deal with today and pertaining to contracts and specific performance and all that stuff.
Well, yeah, because it really says, hey, do what you said you were going to do, or do what it is that you are obligated to do.
Yeah, what the contract stated, you said you were
Yeah, and
going to
that and
do.
that
Yep.
really is, and even you can read cases where um it's the actions of the parties, even if those actions were not outlined in the contract. Excuse me. That if the parties acted contrary to it, or both of them acquiesced in acting differently, the court will look at that as intent and will enforce that, even if the contract states it differently.
Actually, yeah, because equity is all about
Yep.
intent, which
And
we went
so,
through on the
yeah,
other last
really, and
episode.
I've read some cases where, the case went on for 10 years and the court went back to the first 5 minutes and looks at what happened in the first 5 minutes between the parties. And he goes, oh, there's your problem right there. You should have done this. Boom, case closed.
Yeah, and I mean one of the cases we're going to talk about in the second hour today. That case started in I think it was 1789 or something like that, and they didn't get the case settled until 1913,
Yeah.
and they had to go through
So,
everything, all the contracts to look at what ought to be done. Yeah, it's
yeah,
very
all the
interesting.
history,
Yeah,
the history and the titles and the changing of hands and everything, they had to, it's like having a giant knot full of string. And well, they went through that giant ball and untied all the knots, and it took, however long.
yeah, and it is a very confusing case too. We're not going to hit on that one too much, but it's
No.
yeah, there's just because there's it really gets into the weeds. It's not too important, but um, anyways, let's keep moving on in the in Tully's speech here. So, next paragraph says equity does not regard and treat as done what might be done or what could be done, but only what ought to be done. A court of equity regards not merely the external form and appearance of things, but deals with the real facts, the real beneficial interest, treats the rights of the party in whose favor the act should have been done as though it had already been performed. Excuse me. And treats such parties as having the same interest which he would have received if the other party had actually fulfilled his obligation by doing what he should have done, just kind of like we just touched on. Pomeroy declares, quote, that all kinds of equitable property, that is, as distinguished from legal ownership, are, with one or two exceptions, derived from this grand maxim. End quote. The operation of this equity maxim is most strongly exemplified in its application to executory contracts for the sale of land. At law, the contract was regarded as wholly personal, but equity regards it, as far as the land is concerned, as executed, and as operating to transfer the estate from the vendor and vest it to the vendee. That the land ought to be conveyed to the vendee and the purchase price ought to be conveyed to the vendor. Equity therefore regards these as having been done, treats the vendee as the owner of the land, and creates an equitable estate in him. Commiserate with the contract, holding that the vendor, although still possesses the legal estate, holds it in trust for the vendee. Equity close the equitable estate of the vendee with all the incidents of a real ownership. That is a very interesting paragraph right there.
I have so many things to say about
Yeah,
that.
go ahead, go off. What do you got to say?
Well, first I just want to hit on that very first sentence of the paragraph that, he said Pomeroy declares that all kinds of equitable property, that is, as distinguished from legal ownership, are, with one or two exceptions, derived from this grand maxim. If you read that, what he's talking about is someone who is holding equitable title and someone who's holding legal title. That's the difference between beneficiary and trustee. And
Yes,
this maxim oftentimes applies to the trustee when it comes to a public duty, fiduciary responsibilities, paying the bills, managing the security, whatever it might be. And so if there is a beneficiary trustee relationship, and it's bona fide, then this maxim absolutely comes into play and says equity regards as done that which ought to have been done. So if you are a beneficiary and you send notice to your trustee and no action is done on it, in court, in equity, they see it as already having been done, because the beneficiary gave notice to the trustee. The trustee is legally obligated to carry it out. As soon as that notice passes, the court is going to see the thing being done as the day that paper got into the hands of the trustee.
absolutely. Yep.
And that's very, very important to understand, because many times, if you're going to send something off to somebody and you never hear anything back, that's actually very good news, as long as you've got a receipt that you did in fact send it,
Yeah.
because they're going to see it as done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point.
And then we're talking about a little bit lower, between the vendor and the vendee. And the vendor is basically the seller, and the
Mhm.
vendee is the purchaser. So I always have to remind myself, because a lot of times, say vendor, vendee, or principal or debtor, or beneficiary and trustee. Like, oh, all these different titles. Like, really, there's only two offices,
Right.
and those offices can have a bunch of different names depending on the nature of the thing they are involved with, but they truly are the same thing. And so vendor is the seller, vendee is the purchaser. So if the vendee purchases some land from the vendor or the seller, and the seller doesn't pass title, but the under the contract or under the agreement, the purchaser made good, showed good faith, and moved forward, equity is going to see it as already having been done. That now, even though the vendor or the seller is in possession of the lands, they go hocus pocus and they turn what he's holding into legal title, and they basically force the vendor or whoever else to draft a deed of trust, or they'll both execute a deed of trust stating that he's the beneficiary or whatever it might be. And so a lot of times, something that they really don't even have to change hands. Equity is just going to see as already having been done.
Yeah, see, and I don't even think there has to be a trust indenture involved in this. He just says
No.
he holds it in trust for the vendee,
Yes.
meaning a
Because a
trust
trust
arises.
arises.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
trust arises because there was intent between the parties. There was either a
Hmm.
contract or an offer to sell, and that obligation is considered as being fulfilled as soon as one party performs one of the conditions or
Yep.
satisfies one of the conditions. Then that right there, it's done.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, I like he just puts this in such a concise way in this last
Yeah.
little sentence here. It's kind of confusing at first, but once you get it broke down and you understand the vendor part, which I'm actually going to make like a whole spreadsheet with vendee, subrogor, all that stuff just to make it more
Mortgagee, mortgagor.
mortgagee, yeah, all that stuff. I'm gonna make a spreadsheet for to make it simple for everybody to give to everybody because it is confusing. It is really confusing. But yeah, once you get down to it, one is the seller, one is the buyer. That's really
Yeah.
all it means at the
Yeah,
end of the
there's
day.
really, I mean, this is very simplified, but there's two people, and depending on what those two people are either trading or buying or selling or agreeing with, changes what name tag they're wearing. But essentially, the relationship between them is often identical.
Yeah, they're hats. They're changing hats. That's
Yeah,
what it
that's all
really
they're
is.
doing is
Yep,
changing hats.
changing
Okay.
hats. Yep. So, all right.
All right, so I'm going to pick up where he left off. The application of this maxim is also found in cases where there is an express trust to convey the property to a cestui trust, and particularly in the cases of a passive or dry trust. In such cases, an equity exists between the beneficiary and the trustee, with an obligation resting upon the latter, kind of like what we just talked about.
Yep.
The equity is treated as worked out, and the beneficiary is clothed with the equitable estate and under the statute of uses with the legal estate also. The principle of this maxim is also made manifest in trusts arising from the operation of law, implied or constructive. It is
Mm.
also manifested in the direct application of the principle of conversion and reconversion, in which personal estate, in the view of equity, for all purposes becomes real and real estate personal. So I don't know if you had looked into the doctrine of conversion at all.
No, I haven't. No, I haven't gotten into that at
So,
all.
because it basically, like, as far as I understand it, we're just learning out loud here.
Hmm.
As far as I understand it, if you were buying a house, oftentimes the house can be looked at as money, and the money can be looked at as the house in terms of deciding who
Mm.
has what title.
Hmm.
And so I think the doctrine of conversion was, from what I remember, uh, created or written or came up with to get around or to deal with the idea that sometimes the person can't be paid because the asset is a house
Mm.
or whatever it might be. And so, or the person needs the house, but it's like they can't give the house because they only have the money. But, one is representative of the other. And I
So
think that's,
they're kind of converting the asset a little bit.
yeah, they're basically saying that the asset is a thing which it actually isn't. But
Okay.
like, the house is now money, and that money that you're holding, we are going to see as the house in, uh, I guess for the ability for us to give justice.
Huh.
And
Interesting.
so, yeah, pretending that one thing is another thing, or in place of another thing, or having equal value as another thing in order to, so yeah, they're basically converting the asset. So,
Huh. Okay. Interesting.
yeah,
Interesting.
it's really, really interesting some of the equitable doctrines that are out there on the workarounds, the moral and ethical workarounds that they've come up with to actually do justice. And I think if you want to see just how hard equity works to give justice, read some of those doctrines because they truly are trying to line out a path to give people what they justly deserve.
Yeah, the doctrines are very, and I've just been getting into all the doctrines and stuff, but yeah, that's what it seems like is the doctrine is more of the path that
Yeah,
you
the
lay
doctrine is
these maxims
explaining
on.
why the rule is the way that it is.
Right, right. Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
I'll continue.
Perfect. Yep.
Its application has given rise to that species of equitable property or interest recognized by a court of equity as growing out of assignments of possibilities, of things in actions, out of sales of chattels to be acquired in the future, equitable assignments of monies and equitable liens upon lands, chattels, or funds. The application of the principles of this maxim to mortgages resulted in the creation of the equitable estate of the mortgager, known as the equity of redemption, to which I have adverted in discussing the last previous maxim. So that one's big. Equity of redemption is a huge thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we're gonna
and we
do,
did
I'm
cover
sure,
that.
tons of shows of on the equity of redemption.
Yeah, I'm sure. And once people really grasp the crux of what it is, a lot of folks out there, who are either going to lose their house, either due to foreclosure or whatever it might
Hmm.
be, the equity of redemption is something you truly need to know.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of the most foundational pieces, and he's even stating it here that in this
Yep.
maxim is one of the most foundational pieces of the equity of redemption. So,
Yep. 100%.
yeah.
So continuing, among the earliest cases in which this maxim was applied and which exhibits its great scope was that of Frederick versus Frederick. A person had contracted to become a citizen of London, but died before he had carried this agreement into effect. His widow brought suit to procure his personal estate to be distributed in accordance with the custom of London, which applied to citizens only, and which prescribed a different mode of distribution from that which prevailed under the law in other parts of England. The court, invoking this maxim, held that the deceased should be regarded as though he were actually a citizen at the time of his death, and that his estate should be distributed in pursuance of the custom. So, interestingly enough, that can actually be used in an inverse at law side as well. That if your name was on a piece of paper or they assumed that your intent was to be, a US citizen, then they're going to continue as if that is the case.
Yeah, yeah, they're gonna do exactly what you say, what you tell them to do.
Which is interesting because they actually are giving you equity because equity looks to the intent of the parties.
Yeah,
And if your signature is not restricted, if you are not signing within a particular capacity, or you've signed up for certain benefits and didn't claim beneficiary status, they're looking at your intent and all they know is you want to be there.
yeah, exactly, and that's why I harp on the courts aren't corrupt. I'm sure there's corrupt judges out there. Don't get me wrong, but 99% of the time, you told them what you were in that courtroom.
100%. It's all about what comes out of your mouth.
Exactly, and they're just going along with whatever you say.
Yep.
So if you say you're a U.S. citizen, okay, you're a U.S. citizen, buddy.
Yep. If you say, yes, I'm the debtor, sure, I'll be surety.
Yeah, there you go. That's you
Yep.
lost a case. That's by the way by what you told them. You didn't get the
Yep.
outcome you wanted. So,
And that last line too, that his estate should be distributed in pursuance of the custom. So right
hmm
now, if you're the debtor, which for all sakes and purposes is a debt estate being administered by them, they're going to administer it in accordance with the laws that you signed up for.
yeah, absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
like I said, there's no fraud here.
There's no fraud here.
So anyway, we'll continue. An interesting case is found in Coventry versus Barclay. The question was whether a partner was bound by a prior annual settlement of partnership accounts excuse me, whether or not a partner was bound by a prior annual settlement of partnership accounts had, at which he was not present and which he never signed, but which he afterwards saw and verbally assented to. The Lord Chancellor Westbury held that the account was, in equity, signed by said partner when he saw and verbally assented to the same. This, it is seen, was a case where the maxim was applied to a purely personal act. So really, they're kind of seeing it as an in personam thing. It's like, well, you
hmm
saw what was being offered, you didn't say no, and you agreed to it, which is the
hmm
exact same as putting your name on paper.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yep.
an interesting case is also found in Simpson v. Vaughan, or Simpson versus Vaughan, where a bond was drawn by a tradesman intended to be a joint and several bond, but was only joint in its terms. The court held the omission to use words several, in effect as intended, was a mistake, and granted the same relief as if the necessary words to make it several were inserted. So that's another great thing about um, kind of going on the private citizen side is everything you do is about your intent and whether or not it's honorable and whether or not it's respectful. And if you do make clerical errors or grammatical errors or your language is not 100% perfect, you still have to be able to defend it and you still have to be able to know your intent, but it's not going to be as big of a stepping or like a stumbling block, or like a trap wire where it
hmm
is at law.
Yeah,
And
and I th
so, but
if
but
you can
again, you got
prove
to
your
know who
intent.
you are. You got to
Yeah.
know what you want. You got to know what your intent is.
Hmm.
Because without those things, they are going to see it as an ignorant mistake and they'll treat it as such.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are not forgiving in law. They're only forgiving in equity. One little
No,
thing. Yeah. So,
because here's the thing, law is a lot like geometry. If you don't have the right angle, sorry, you're the picture that you want, you're not getting it. We'll see you
yep.
later.
Yep.
But
No worries.
equity is a lot like art, where it's like going back to that 5-year-old who tried to draw a spider. And you're like, what is that? And you're like, it's a spider. You're like, okay, it is a spider then.
Right. That because he intended it to be a spider.
Because he intended it to be, and he had
Yep.
no malice in his heart when he drew that thing, which every adult knows is not a spider. But
Yep.
yeah, so
Exactly.
that's another thing that equity will look at.
Yep.
So um continuing on. Another interesting case is found in Bovey versus Smith, decided as early as 1682. A trustee, having sold the land which he held in trust to a stranger without notice
Mhm.
for value actually paid, this stranger suffered a fine with proclamation and 5 years passed. The trustee afterwards, for a valuable consideration paid, purchased the same lands of the vendee. Lord Nottingham held that the trustee should stand seized in trust of the lands as at first, as if they had never been sold or any fine levied.
Hmm. Yeah, because he breached, that was a breach of trust, if I understand it
Yeah,
right.
because he didn't notify the beneficiary.
Exactly. Yep.
Because I don't know if anybody out there who's got, let's say, student loans or, a retirement account or investment account, oftentimes when whoever is managing that account, if that company gets bought out or they sell shares or whatever else to another company who's now managing it, they will send you a notice saying, hey, just so you know, somebody else is managing this money now. It's going to take place this effect. Like that's what they're talking about. So the trustee in
Exactly.
this in this case had land that he was holding for the beneficiary and sold it, never gave notice. And then the
Hmm.
person that bought it ended up getting fines. There's some proclamation that was issued
And
over
for
it.
value actually paid. That's an important part
Yeah,
too.
so
That
he
no
sold it under the
notice,
table.
but there was actually valuable consideration, meaning there was actually gold and silver. So
Oh, yeah,
yeah, he said, but he gave it without notice to the beneficiary, even though there was valuable consideration. There was no notice to the beneficiary, which breached the trust.
100%. So yeah, that's where on one hand, yeah, there was valuable consideration and sure, title can pass, but the property in question is held in trust and all parties to that trust must be given notice if a transfer is
Mhm.
going to be made that affects them.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
That'd probably be a really interesting case to dig into right there. Actually,
yeah, it really would.
it'd
And
be
it's
very
interesting
telling.
because the trustee realized he screwed up and tried to buy it back.
Right. Yeah.
Because it says, it's like the stranger suffered a fine and like 5 years had gone by. So that who knows what the fines have racked up to now. So the
Yeah.
trustee's like, ah, crap.
Shit.
And so
Yeah.
he goes and tries to buy it back. And Lord Nottingham goes, no, no, both of
No.
you put it down. You
Yeah.
never sold it and no fines were any levied. Please
Yep.
behave. Thank you.
Just give it back to the beneficiary, please.
Yeah. It's like the beneficiary's like, is anyone going to send me anything?
Right. Yeah. Hello. Hello. That's how we feel. That's like,
Yeah.
hello.
Yeah. But anytime now I get statements in the mail, I'm like, thank you, trustee.
Right. Yeah. I mean, dude, yeah, dude, definitely, it changes your perspective on a lot of things for sure. For sure. All right. So we do have, what do we got? A couple more pages here till we reach the end of Pomeroy talking about the Maxim. So I will continue reading from here. A case strongly and forcibly illustrating the manner in which a court of equity applies this maxim is found in 112 Illinois, page 209, in which decree rendered by myself, oh, so by Tully, which a decree rendered by myself as chancellor was affirmed. The complainant, living in one of the western states, was engaged in business and became involved beyond his ability to pay. If forced to make prompt payment, his father, living in Chicago, died interstate, whereby the son became entitled to an individual interest in some unimproved city real estate. The complainant came to Chicago and consulted with the husband of his sister, who was one of the heirs. He stated to his brother-in-law that he was embarrassed by his debts and wanted to convey the property to his wife for fear that his creditors might make him trouble. They went together to the brother-in-law's attorney, not the attorney in the Supreme Court, and requested him to draw the necessary papers and send them to the complainant to be executed. The complainant then returned home and a short time thereafter received from his brother-in-law a deed running from himself and wife to the brother-in-law, conveying the real estate for a nominal money consideration, accompanying the deed with a letter from the brother-in-law stating that the lawyer advised that the deed had better be made directly to him, the brother-in-law, rather than to the wife, as if made to the latter, it might lead to an attack by the creditors, and that he, the brother-in-law, could convey the property at any time to the wife, which of course he would do when requested. Okay. That was a lot of words right there. We'll finish the section up before we break it down, though. In the course of the 3 or 4 years, the complainant merged to get through with his financial difficulties and applied to his brother-in-law for a conveyance of the property, which was flatly refused. Suit was commenced in the circuit court to compel a conveyance to the wife. Upon the hearing, I held that inasmuch as the brother-in-law became a trustee for the conveying the title to his wife of his own motion and seeking, he could not be heard to set up the alleged intent of the husband to defend creditors as against his duty to carry out the terms of the trust, and decreed that he make conveyance to the wife upon the principle that what ought to be done will be treated as having been done. It turned out to be a clear case of biter being bitten. For upon announcing my opinion, the defendant's solicitor asked leave to amend his answer and set up fact that the defendant had erected a building upon the premises worth $8,000, for which he claimed he ought to be compensated. I refused the leave, applying another maxim that he who doth inequity shall not have equity. I actually like that, the way he puts that better.
Yeah. By the way, that very last line there answers one of the questions you and I have had for a while, which in the Bible, what is iniquity? And here he's basically saying that iniquity is the opposite of equity.
That's the more I've been reading the Bible, that's the conclusion I've been coming to.
Yes, if those who work iniquity.
Yes.
And so that's the inequitable way of treating people.
Mm-hmm.
So what's great about this uh, example that he gives here, there's actually a lot of things that you can draw out of it. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
initially make any notes here, but after reading it for a second time, so there's this guy, and he's got some debts to pay, and he's like, well, when my creditors come after me, I don't have money, so they're going to take my property too, and I don't want to lose that. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to convey it to my wife. That
Yep.
way, it's in her name. However, the brother-in-law that he consulted about all this, he's like, hey, my attorney said you should probably just convey that to me, because if you convey it to your wife, they can still take it. And the reason is
Mm-hmm.
because if you're married, your property is community property. It's been commingled.
Yep.
Therefore, they can go after and they can take it from your wife. So just convey it to me. And then when you figure your money stuff out, I'll convey it to your wife.
Yep.
And so that was the initial agreement. And then when the guy had all this financial difficulties figured out, went to his brother-in-law and said, hey, will you convey that to my wife now? And he went, nah, I'm good. And then, in the meantime, he also built a house on there for $8,000. And so the court of equity was like, look, you said initially you advised him that to convey it to me, to avoid having it taken, and I will convey it back later. He stated openly that he will be the interim trustee for the property until
Mm-hmm.
the financial difficulty has been resolved, and then he will convey it back, and he didn't do that. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's why it said here that um, upon the hearing, I held that as the brother-in-law became a trustee for conveying the title to the wife of his own motion and seeking, because he's the one that confronted this guy about his debts. So therefore,
Exactly.
he could not be heard to basically to say that the alleged intent of the husband was to defraud creditors. because it's like, well, the husband didn't come to you and say, hey, I want to defraud these creditors. Can you hide this for me? He wanted to convey it to his wife, which means it still technically was available to creditors. Therefore, he's not defrauding anybody. And the court caught that. And they
Mhm.
also said that now you, Mr. Brother-in-law, cannot say that that was his intent because you're the one that approached him with the solution.
Yeah.
So he actually did that guy a favor because he could have gotten nabbed for defrauding creditors, but he basically was put in a trust at the request of his brother-in-law. So therefore, it was seen as just a regular trust agreement in which the brother-in-law was the trustee for. And so they said, nope, that's what it is. And those who do iniquity shall not have equity because you tried to throw him under the bus,
Yeah.
uh, denying that you had said what you said. You're not doing equity, therefore you will not get equity.
Yep. It turned
So,
out to be a clear case of a biter being bitten.
yep.
Yeah.
So that's happens all the time. But you know what? If you do right, and this is the biggest thing that a lot of these belligerent people don't understand is that you have to act honorably everywhere you go and every word that you speak, because later on your words will be used as evidence of your intent.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I'm sure that's going to come up a lot in this next maxim we're going to talk about, which is he who comes into
Absolutely.
equity must come with clean hands.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm excited to look into that one actually. I haven't done any searching on it, but I'm sure it's going to be a good one. This was a really good. Man, there was a lot of good information about this maxim.
Yeah. And this is just a sort of off topic, but it's connected. There's that brand out there that says dirty hands, clean money.
Yeah, yeah,
Every
yeah.
time I look at that, I'd be like, in equity, you better not be coming in with dirty hands.
Nope, nope. You better come with them clean hands for
But
sure.
if you're coming in with dirty hands physically because of all your sweat equity, then maybe you'll get equity.
Yeah, you need that sweat equity for sure.
Yeah, if you don't have sweat behind those actually physically dirty hands, good luck getting equity, buddy.
Yeah, I mean that's right, and that like we talk about all the time that's just a foundational thing in life. If that's just how you should operate in your everyday interactions with everybody in the world. Just come with
Yeah,
clean hands. Just do the
treat
right
people how
thing.
you want to be treated. I mean, if you think about the ultimate equity maxim is the golden rule, because
Absolutely.
all morality and all maxims flow from treating others how you yourself would want to be treated. And when you read these maxims, you go, well, yeah, I would want to get justice. I would want to have equity done, not just by halves. I want to see what should have been done, as done. Like it should have been done a long time ago. Every
Hmm.
person, I think, has that natural sense of justice, and it all flows from the golden rule.
And that is the best thing about equity too, is it can go back in time. You can literally reverse decision, like we talked about. One of the cases it started in 1789, and all the way till 1913, they finally got a resolution on that case. Can go all the way back in time and figure it out and do what ought to be done.
Wow. And so, yeah, that's another thing too, is equity is outside of space and time. So,
Yeah. Which I mean is
if,
a huge deal right there, man. That's a
yeah, which I
huge
mean,
deal.
there is such a thing as latches, where
Of
sometimes the,
course,
the other
yeah.
the other party or maybe the judge will try to attach latches onto a claim that you're making because your rights will stale over time if you sit on them. But if you truly have an equitable case, and you are truly seeking equity and it is to be done to you, it should be done to you. It doesn't matter if 150 years have passed.
No. Yep. Yeah.
So,
It does what ought to be done. Yeah.
yeah, that right there is called grace. You can
Yep.
live your whole life in iniquity, and if the last 10 minutes you realize it and you give yourself over, it's as if it was done the entire time.
Yeah, and I mean goes back to another biblical principle of repentance, really. I mean, that's basically what that is. How I see it, anyways.
Yeah,
You
the equity of repentance.
Yeah, you have to repent for what you've done, and then through that, that's not the final step. That's why I like. There's this one girl I've been talking to. She's really biblical, but that's what she talks about. That's not the next step. That's not the last step. You can't just do that, and then you're done, and you're part of the elect, and then that's it. You have to keep continue to do that. Keep your hands
Absolutely.
clean, you know.
And
It's
yeah, it's like that in this world too. I mean,
yep,
people think,
yep,
oh, I'm just going to send off this piece of paper and I'm good. And I know people that have sent the correct paperwork off, but they didn't fully read it at all.
right.
They just went, oh, this is what I have to do. What is that? Oh, yeah, I'll sign that. And they sent that off. It's like, you shouldn't do that.
Which, dude, that's the craziest fucking thing in the
Yeah.
world. Like
Oh, I'm just
what?
gonna, yeah, I'm gonna send this 40-page affidavit to the Secretary of Treasury. I read it once.
Right, didn't have a dictionary beside me, didn't look up any words, just fucking, it looks all right.
Yeah,
Yeah, everybody else is
yeah,
doing it.
still eating Fruit Loops and watching American Idol, thinking
Right.
you're like, come on.
That's hilarious. But I mean, there's a lot of truth in that. Honestly, there is just a lot of truth in that.
Yeah,
And
and that's there, being responsible. And if you want to be in the private, you have to be responsible. And that means that you take the reins for your entire life. Every horse that is attached to your carriage, you better be watching out for.
yeah, what's the maxim he was sleeps on his rights, has none?
Yeah,
Eh,
equity aids the vigilant, not
yeah,
those who slumber on their
slumber on their
rights.
rights. Yeah, and
I'm,
absolutely,
yeah, and
absolutely.
that's the thing is if you, and the only way, and this is where you can kind of get in that big circle about, okay, well, what came first? Where do my rights come from? It's like, well, it's the sense of things that should be done to me or not should not be done to me. It's like, okay, well, where does that come from? And that's why if somebody is not in touch with God or not in touch with the spirit of creation or their soul or
Hmm.
whatever you want to call it, if you are not supremely in touch with that thing, I don't think you can fully understand equity.
No, I don't think because that is truly where your rights come from. So I don't think you can even touch your rights until you're right with God.
No, because technically, it really, I mean, if you think about it, it's like, where do rights come from? It's like something written on a piece of paper that's enshrined in glass up on a wall. That actually means absolutely nothing in
that is not,
terms of what
yeah,
actually happens to you.
that is not where your rights come from at
No,
all.
your rights only, you only have rights that you can enforce. That's
And
it.
you can't find your rights on a piece of paper either.
You
The
can't because
Constitution is not your rights.
no,
The
it's not because if you
Constitution,
show up somewhere and they say, "Where's your right?" and you just show them the Constitution, they're not going to give it to you
no,
because what's written in that document or any of the doctrines of equity or any of the maxims flows from an even higher source and they have to see it flow from that source and that's in your intent and you cannot have that intent unless it's in your heart, which is well, a lot of times why just sending off paperwork doesn't work because
hmm
in order to truly get equity they need to see that goodness flowing from the source, which is you, the human being.
hmm yeah, yeah, I
So
absolutely agree with that.
yeah, I
Yeah,
mean I'm sure we could do a 20-hour podcast on this subject alone. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. We absolutely, and I'm sure we'll get there in the future too.
actually, you
Um,
know what? I think that's what this podcast is. Never mind.
right. Yeah, I think, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it, man. I love it.
Okay.
So I did bring so where Tully pulled his information from, like he said, he puts it in parentheses even up here. He pulls this from Pomeroy, and Pomeroy explains this in other sections, but the main section, like where he explains the foundation of this, is section 364 of Equity Jurisprudence by John Norton Pomeroy. So I did pull that section, and if you want, we can just read that into the record and discuss that.
Absolutely.
Um,
I've actually got the book in front of me as well. So
okay, cool, yeah, because I did pull the footnotes too. The second footnote three, I thought was really interesting. So maybe we can.
yeah. And again, it's worth harping on that in these old books, if a footnote takes up more than half a page, you better be reading
You
it.
better read it. Yep, you better read it. That's exactly why I took it up because I was pulled in 364 and I was like, there's more in the footnotes than there is in this section. So there's got to be some good shit in there. And there is.
Yeah. And,
There is.
and I will say, I think one of the longest and best footnotes you will ever read is in John Norton Pomeroy's Equity Jurisprudence, sections 1419 through like 1422. There's a footnote in there that spans about 4 or 5 pages. And not only that, but the very last bit of text in those last couple paragraphs, I think are probably the heart of all equity.
Oh, and you know what? I got to get you to scan those pages over to me too, because just for everybody's information, if you get that book off of the Internet Archive, those sections are missing
Yeah.
from from about 397 or something like that, 1397 on. It's missing about the last 20 sections of this book, which is very interesting. Just
Yeah,
saying.
because again, um, that is really the chance. What he goes over there is the chance the beneficiary has to absolutely get a full explanation of everything that has been going on that involves them. And the copy that I have, what is this? 1906 or something like that is the copy that I
Mhm.
have. 1905 is the copy that I have, and that's before the Rockefellers started ripping
Yep.
all the good stuff out.
Yep.
So yeah, but 14, 2 seconds here. Um, Believe it or not, this John Norton Pomeroy's equity jurisprudence, you can find it in a variety of different types of volumes out there, but I think really what it is, there's 4 volumes, and then there's 2 supplementary volumes. Isn't that right?
Yeah. Equity remedies.
So
Yep. He got,
yeah,
yeah,
the
equity
remedies.
jurisprudence and then equity remedies.
Right. Okay, yeah. So the first 4 volumes cover the jurisprudence and all that's involved in that, and the 2 volumes that are usually appended to it cover all of the remedies that explain how to get a remedy based on the previous 4 volumes. But
Which, how
anyway,
nice of them. I mean, how fucking
yeah,
nice of them.
I mean, people go look at these books and it's like you don't have to read it cover to cover. If you have
No.
an issue in your life, you can reference this book somewhere in there and it
And
will guide you through the equitable
that's
process.
why they're structured in the way they are too. They put
Yes.
into sections. So you can
Which
say section here, section there. That's how you cite these things.
And which actually, that's a good point. That brings me to my point because the very last part in the equity jurisprudence and what it explains is called getting the full accounting,
Yeah.
marshaling securities and creditor suits. And it starts, let me see. Yeah, section 1420, um, chapter second, suits for an accounting. The copy that I have, 1905 Equity Jurisprudence, is sections 1420 through 1421. Just those, they're the very last 3 pages in the last book of the jurisprudence series that tells you everything you need to know about the all caps name and your beneficiary status in relation to it, and the remedy that is involved in getting an answer and an accounting for what has been done with that name the entire time you've been alive.
Absolutely. Get reading, people. Get reading, people. That's what I'm gonna say.
Get get reading and stay off TikTok
Yeah, stay off. Please stay off TikTok.
because
Jesus.
that's not there's I'm not gonna get started. I'm not gonna
Yeah,
do
we
it.
don't need to go on a TikTok rant. Everybody knows. If you're here, then you know what TikTok is, because you got to be a little higher vibration than that to be
Yeah.
seeking this information
And
for
they
sure.
name it TikTok because they're basically telling you what's happening to your brain if you watch it for a long time. It's like, TikTok, your
Yeah,
brain's about to become mush.
yeah, it's mushing. It's mushing,
There's
buddy.
another 400 shorts, and you too can act like you've got a frontal lobotomy now.
Yeah, perfect. All right, all right. I'm gonna read this section into the record then, and then we can discuss it. All right, so this is section 364 of Volume 1 of Equity Jurisprudence by John Norton Pomeroy. So, first maxim, its importance and general operation. The first maxim in the list has been stated in somewhat varying language by different text writers, but without any substantial variation in the meaning. I think the following form is both strictly accurate and sufficiently comprehensive in expressing the equitable principle. Equity regards and treats that as done which in good conscience ought to be done. Some writers have failed to apprehend the full significance of this maxim, and have described its effect in altogether too narrow and partial manner. Others have correctly looked upon it as the very foundation of all distinctively equitable property rights, of all equitable estates and interest, both real and personal, and its fact the source of a large part of the division of equity jurisprudence which is concerned with equitable property. The doctrines and rules. Oh shoot, where did the doctrines and rules which create and define equitable estates or interest are in great measure derived from its operation so far from the maxim being confined to express executory contracts and to those dispositions of property which gives rise to an equitable conversion. It has been applied by the most eminent courts to all classes of equities to every instance where an equitable ought with respect to the subject matter rest upon one person towards another. To every kind of case where an affirmative equitable duty to do some positive act delves upon one party, and a corresponding equitable right is held by another party. Whenever courts of high authority have dealt with the principle in a narrow manner and have given to it a more restricted operation and effect, their language, although perhaps very general in its terms, should be taken as confined, and as intended by the court to be confined to the particular application of the maxim then under judicial investigation. Okay.
Yeah,
Say,
Tully really pulled a lot of his speech right from Pomeroy, almost word for word in some cases.
but yeah, basically, I mean, yeah, it's almost word for word what Pomeroy said, and I mean, it's if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, did you want to read the footnote of Adam's equity? Because I can read that if you'd like.
yeah, yeah, let's do that because I think that's a really interesting
Okay. And for those
footnote.
listening, this footnote was inserted right after the sentence where he said, "Others have correctly looked upon the maxim as the very foundation of all distinctly equitable property rights, of all equitable estates and interest, both real and personal." And then it relates to the footnote. So this is footnote 3, Adam's equity, 135. Quote, "What ought to be done is considered in equity as done. And its meaning is that whenever the holder of property is subject to an equity in respect of it, the court will, as between the parties to the equity, treat the subject matter as if the equity had been worked out and as impressed with the character which it would then have borne. The simplest operation of this maxim is found in the rule that trusts and equities of redemption are treated as estates, but its effect is most obvious in the constructive change of property from real to personal estate and vice versa. I think he's talking about the conversion doctrine there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, but its effect is most obvious in the constructive change of property from real to personal estate and vice versa, so as to introduce new laws of devolution and transfer. The examples given of trust and equities of redemption plainly show that Mr. Adams' definition was intended to include all equitable property as resulting from this single principle. This is also the view of Mr. Spence. He expressly represents all trust and other equitable estates, whether growing out of executory contract creating the trust or out of a will or otherwise, as the consequences of this fruitful maxim."
Yeah, you caught on to the exact sentence that I thought was so interesting.
Yeah, because that's what people need to understand
Yeah.
is I'm sorry, where was it here?
The simplest operation of this maxim is found in the rule that trust and equities of redemption are treated as estates.
And the rule, not the idea, not the consensus, not like the general opinion, the
Yeah,
rule.
yeah, yeah. The rule that trust and
Yeah,
equities of redemption are treated as estates.
trusts and equities of redemption are treated as estates. So that's the thing. If a trust arises and you happen to be in a position where you're the beneficiary of the name and estate, guess what? Under equity, the rule is that the subject matter or the property that's being contentious or whatever, a trust arises, duties devolve upon one party, rights devolve upon the other party, and it's enforceable. And there doesn't have to be an express trust or a trust indenture. All there has to be is a relationship between two people and a property or right in question, and the rule will treat the whole thing as an estate.
Yep. Yep. But its effects is most obvious in the constructive change of property from real to personal estate and vice versa.
Yep. So
So Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say just this is a table of authorities all day long,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
all day
I'm
long.
shocked at how often Supreme Court justices cite Pomeroy's story and
I am
uh,
shocked, shocked. Yeah,
what's the chancellor? Suits and Chancery. What's his name? Gibson. Gibson.
Gibson.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I am. I'm just shocked at how, like, once I started reading all these equity opinions, I'm like, oh, that's where they draw all their authority from.
yeah.
Like it,
And you even
it
look at the at law side, and the at law side is mirroring, especially they're I mean they're using equity and stuff all day long too.
all day long. Yeah, all day
Yeah.
long because they have to. They have to. They can't. The law doesn't work without this.
Yeah, I would say that. Oh, I was gonna say like, the law is like a piano, but equity is the sound.
The tone, yeah, the rhythm you make with the piano.
Yeah, you
Yes.
know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yep.
Or
That's a
or
great.
or
Yeah, that's a
something like,
great
but basically
analogy. Yeah.
one flows from the other, which actually, you know what? No, with the piano, that would be an inverse relationship. But basically, the at law side was born out of equity. And so you can't actually understand law unless you understand equity. And as soon as you understand equity, you'll understand law all day long.
Yeah, and that's a great point because I will say ever since I've started studying this, even though I don't study the military side anymore, I do understand it way better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, after reading and truly becoming, I would not a master, obviously, but I'm very familiar now with a lot of
Hmm.
the equity maxims and how they've been applied. You can go through and sit down and read codes and statutes and ordinances all day, and you're like, oh, yeah, I understand all of this 100% completely now.
Right. Oh yeah, and then you're like, oh, there's equity, there's equity, there's equity,
Yeah,
there's
there's
equity.
equity, there's
Yep.
equity. That smells like iniquity, but they're calling it equity. That's
Right.
not a good.
Yeah. What is it? Kazooitry?
Yeah.
Kazooitress. Yeah.
And by the way, is kazooitry come out of that instrument, the kazoo? Do you know what a kazoo? Do
Yeah, I do
you
know.
know what a
Yeah.
kazoo is?
You know what? We should look into the fucking origins of kazoos. I bet it's
Because the
wild.
thing is, like, when you're playing a kazoo, it's not a real instrument, and no serious musician would call it one.
That's
But the
so
thing
funny.
is when you make little like buzzing noises through it, the kazoo looks like an instrument. The noise sounds kind of like music, but
Dude,
it's neither.
that's so interesting. I'm gonna look into the origins of the kazoo.
Yeah, because and that's how they do it is they create all these shadows where it's got the shape of the thing, it moves like the thing, and it's got all these attributes that are somewhat like it, and they just graft over the language to convince you that that is the real thing, but in fact it's not. It's just a kazoo.
I didn't realize I was. That's so funny. I didn't realize I was going to bring this up, or I would have actually looked up the definition of kazooitry because I don't know the actual definition of it, but it's like it's basically people acting like they're practicing law, but it's like he's like Whitestone saying it's a kazoo. Like it looks like it, do, 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 do,
Yeah.
do, but it's
Actually,
not.
in I've my 1843 copy of Bouvier, they've got kazooitry in there.
Oh, do you want to grab it real quick?
Yeah, yeah. Give me 1 second.
Okay, yep, yep. Yeah, kazooitry is such an interesting thing. We have the one person we follow. He talks about it in the Jesuits being kazooitrists, and that's where all of this crazy law stuff comes from. And the reason it's so interesting is because people who practice kazooitry cannot practice equity because they don't have clean hands. So, and yeah, just the kazoo analogy that hit the home right there.
Man, just
That's such a
imagine
great
playing a
analogy.
kazoo with dirt all over your hands. That's
Okay, what are you gonna make with that? What are you doing?
yeah. It's like, dude, what this guy just crawled out of a sewer and he's blowing to this little piece of plastic. He's a nut job.
That's hilarious. All right,
So,
you know what? Actually, we're at the top of the hour right now. Let's save kazooitry for the top of the for the beginning of the second hour.
great.
All right. All right. So that's it for the first hour, everybody. So you heard what we're gonna start talking about on the second hour. And actually we are gonna on the second hour, we are going to get into a couple of Supreme Court decisions like I try and do every time. Because I think it's this foundational piece to studying law. You gotta study the Supreme Court. So we are gonna cover 1913 Camp v. Boyd 5 630 US 229 and 1896 Willard v. Talo 75 US 557. I hope to see everybody over on the other side. We appreciate you being with us. See you on the other side. Seek truth and honor the Creator above all, and let that be the whole of all.
That's the important thing here, is that everyone's word should be meant for a use.
And the words that I'm using today are meant to pull down idols within people's temples.
Meaning that I want to destroy
Falsities that they have idolized.
for their entire life.
And just pull those out and sweep them clean. And before that temple,
And get reinfested with a new lie. Give it true life.